everyone, my name is Jordyn Polet, and this is my capstone on crisis in education, IEP fulfillment, zero tolerance policies, and students with disabilities in the New York City public school system. So before I get into everything, the terms IEP and MDR will appear quite often in this presentation, so I just want to give a brief overview. Under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, all students with disabilities have the right to a free and appropriate public education. The primary vehicle for providing FAPE to students with disabilities is through an individualized education program, which outlines students' specific needs and specialized services. IDEA also provides extra protection for students with disabilities in disciplinary measures through a manifestation determination review. This is used to determine if the student's behavior might have been a result from unmet IEP needs. I also want to highlight two key forms of suspension. The first is superintendent suspensions, which last longer than 10 days and require the school to provide an MDR. The second is principal suspensions, which are less than 10 days and don't require this MDR. Moving forward to my background, a majority of schools within the New York City public school system are consistently underfunded and lack critical resources such as special education teachers. This contributes to the thousands of students' IEPs that go unfulfilled every year, especially in predominantly Black, Hispanic, and low-income districts. In addition, students with disabilities are disproportionately impacted by zero tolerance policies, particularly principal suspensions, which don't require that manifestation determination review. Ultimately, this all ties into the troubling statistic that youth with learning disabilities represent 85% of the population in juvenile detention facilities. Here's where I'd like to explain why I chose this topic. I chose this topic because I too had an IEP when I was in public school. And not only was this IEP not properly executed at times, but I was also categorized by some of my teachers as different. Luckily, I had a mom who never stopped fighting for my educational rights. However, I acknowledge that many students do not have the same support and resources that I did. So through this project, I really wanted to be that voice and advocate for those students. So my research question is, what are the impacts of IEP fulfillment and zero tolerance policies on students with disabilities in the New York City public school system? And how does this affect student susceptibility to what has been coined the IEP to prison pipeline? Here I have my conflict map. It's quite crazy. But this map highlights the political, economic, security, and social structures, as well as dynamics, including connections, positive influence and negative influence, all of which impact the actors within this conflict. The primary actors in this conflict are students with disabilities and IEPs, special education teachers due to their direct involvement in providing these specialized services, and principals and superintendents because of their direct involvement in discipline processes. Through this mapping process and my data analysis, I was able to categorize the issues of this conflict through the lens of three themes. The first being justice, highlighting unmet needs and unfair discipline processes. The second is intersectionality, highlighting the role systemic barriers play and the challenges faced by students with disabilities. And the third being deviance, underlining the impact zero tolerance policies have on students' vulnerabilities to the school to prison pipeline. These three themes help create the foundation for my interventions. So my first intervention is dialogue and deliberation. This intervention addresses students with disabilities' need for equity within their education. The purpose of this intervention is to transform attitudes toward disability, foster greater inclusivity within schools, and reduce due process complaints. In each school, this process involves biannual meetings where parents and guardians of students with IEPs and school administrators engage in discussions surrounding issues and stigma faced by students with disabilities. In addition, participants will set action plans and goals for fostering greater equity and inclusivity within their school. To ensure that this intervention is culturally sensitive, language interpretation services must be offered to limited English-speaking parents and guardians. These meetings should also include a framework of intersectionality to understand and discuss how race, ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic status intersect with the inequities in special education. My second intervention is restorative circles. When students' educational needs are not met, acting out or misbehaving is often use of what little power they hold within this system. Therefore, students need greater power over their educational experiences and within disciplinary processes. Because the New York City Department of Education does not mandate restorative justice programs, restorative justice practices vary across all schools. This intervention seeks to implement a standard operating procedure for restorative justice circles. It also aims to reduce schools' reliance on zero tolerance policies, reduce students' vulnerabilities to the IEP to prison pipeline, and foster greater relationship building between students with IEPs and school staff. This intervention utilizes proactive and responsive circles, bringing together students with IEPs and respective school staff. Proactive circles provide students a space to share their experiences and raise concerns about their educational services. Responsive circles, on the other hand, are used to respond to student conflict by identifying underlying needs and engaging in collaborative resolution processes. My last intervention is a policy amendment. In the 2021-2022 school year, over 14,000 students with disabilities had insufficient IEP service, and over 8,000 students with disabilities faced principal suspensions. And given the vast proportion of students with disabilities in the juvenile justice system, students need greater protection from zero tolerance policies. The objective of this intervention is to address the MDR loophole in principal suspensions and reduce students' vulnerabilities, again, to the IEP to prison pipeline. This intervention proposes a policy amendment to the New York City Department of Education's current disciplinary policy, making manifestation determination reviews required in all forms of suspension, no matter the length. Here I have my network map. This map highlights 20 actors, with central level authority actors shown in orange, district level actors shown in yellow, and school level actors shown in blue. The different levels of actors alongside the arrows that represent power over represent the hierarchical aspect of this network. This network also includes a decentralized element, as most actors represent an entire group of people, best viewed as cliques. This network is also open, as all students in New York City are able to attend New York City public schools. However, this network does pose a few challenges. The first is existing ties to the status quo. Some actors within this network, such as general education parents or general education students, may not see the need for some of these interventions. The second is resources. Gaining support and investment in these interventions, particularly from those central level authority actors, may prove challenging, as their lack of direct involvement in schools means they do not witness these problems and issues firsthand. Lastly, homophily and structural holes. There's a presence of homophily amongst and between actors, creating structural holes that isolate information flow between policy and decision-making actors in orange, and those affected by these policies and decisions at the school level in blue. To bridge these structural holes, a few actors within this network stick out as natural brokers. One in particular is regional superintendents, whose position within this network, right at the top in yellow, and unique social capital enable them to bridge these gaps in information. To combat these challenges and to ensure the sustainability of these interventions, the strategy of network weaving, which moves through 4 stages, including scattered fragments, hub and spoke, multi-hub, and core and periphery, is crucial for building connections and opening up pathways for information flow between actors within this network. To monitor and evaluate this process, results-based management will help analyze inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impacts correlated with each stage of network weaving. Indicators that will demonstrate sustainable change is occurring throughout this process may look like a change in actors' perceptions, such as a shift toward restorative justice practices and away from zero tolerance policies, and a shift towards fostering greater inclusivity of students with disabilities in their schools, as well as an increase in IEP fulfillment and a decrease in suspension rates. To conclude, the proposed interventions utilize restorative justice practices and a policy change in an attempt to address underlying unmet needs and promote equitable education practices for students with disabilities in the New York City public school system, with the ultimate goal of reducing students' vulnerabilities to the IEP to prison pipeline. Thank you.
Jordyn. Amy or Mark, any questions to start us off? Okay, I have a question. So New York City public schools do have some restorative justice circles, right, which you and I have talked about. How does what you're proposing compare to what New York City public schools are already doing?
Yeah, so a lot of schools are doing restorative practices and restorative circles, but like I said, since the DOE doesn't mandate these programs, everybody's doing it differently. So you could go into one school and they have a whole different way of doing it than another school. So what I'm proposing is like a standard operating procedure for that. So every school has like guidelines to follow for this, and especially for these students with IEPs, just to make sure that it's pretty steady throughout the schools.
What would be like some, I don't know, sort of success criteria according to which that a restorative justice SOP might outline best practices?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think an indicator would be those referrals towards suspension. How many of those responsive circles could decrease those referral rates? So when teachers or principals or superintendents are like, okay, this is a big conflict, we're needing to address this, okay, let's go to restorative justice practices. After those circles, what's that referral rate? I think would be a good indicator of that.
Any other questions? Yeah, in the back there.
Yes. Great presentation.
Thank you.
I did want to check about the special ed mediation program throughout your state. The New York Peace Institute has a really robust special ed program. I was wondering how that fit into your analysis.
Yeah, so in this intervention, so it's kind of an early intervention. The New York Peace Institute deals a lot with those mediations before they go to these due process complaints, which are legal measures parents can take to get their student services provided to them if they're not being provided, or get the school to pay for a private education for their students. So this is kind of one step in between that, before that mediation, to have parents meet with school administrators to first discuss that, discuss their problems and raise issues. And yes, that was part of what informed this dialogue and deliberation. I wanted to think of something that could be done within the schools before it got to an outside provider of mediation. Thank you.
Restorative justice at the New York Peace Institute.
Yeah.
Just mediation. Legal services.
All right, thanks, Jordyn.
Thank you.